Season 1's epilogue has me so excited for Yunque Summit, which is great because Season 2 is coming up fast. But as eager as I am to get to Yunque Summit, a lot's happened since our final showdown with Bringer. So, in preparation for the next leg of our adventure, I think now is a great time to look back and recap everything that we've been through so far. Now that said, I have already put together a comprehensive recap of the events of chapters 1 through 5. So this video will only be covering the events that have taken place after that, which means we're mostly going to be focusing on the adventures we had with Astra-Yao and Mockingbird, although we're also going to have to talk a little bit about Lycaon and Anby's character missions as well as the Ridu's Got Boo event because all three are plot relevant. So please make sure you've completed those along with the main story before watching the rest of this video. And as always, there will be timestamps in the description box if you need them, and I will put any video notes and corrections in the pinned comment if I have them. Alrighty guys, I hope you're ready because it's finally time for the Season 1 Rewind, Part 2. And it all starts off with our favorite pop star, Astra-Yao. Now, some people might find it a little odd that two random proxies on 6th Street are friends with one of New Eridu's biggest celebrities since there wasn't any lead up to this in the main story. But some players did have the opportunity to witness Astra-Yao's first meeting with Belle and Wise during a limited event back in version 1.3. In this event, a very strange Bangbu named Snap showed up at Random Play with a request for Wise and Belle to help debug a virtual reality system that Tops developed for the HIA. But this Bangbu isn't really a Bangbu, it's Astra. Someone at Tops had given her a sensory sync prototype device that allowed her to possess Snap the same way that Phaethon possesses Eos, minus the holo exploration aspect, of course. As for why Tops is working on sensory sync and why they'd give that prototype to Astra, your guess is as good as mine. But this event is how Phaethon became good online friends with Astra, and I say online because Astra never really met them in person and they didn't meet her in person. In fact, they only identify her as Chaotic Fried Rice, which is her screen name. But friends are friends online or offline, which is why it's not that strange for her to ask them to hang out in her spare time at the end of Chapter 5. Unfortunately, being friends with a pop star doesn't help you get any concert tickets no matter how badly you want them. But coincidentally, picking up an Internaut commission from that same pop star and skipping off into the holo to look for an authentic copy of Huron de Winter's Legacy album does get you concert tickets. And Astra is thrilled to bits to finally have the album that she's been searching for so long. But her manager and bodyguard, Eve, isn't too happy with her running off again. So it's Eve's responsibility to drag her back to work. And that's when Eve notices that someone is tailing them. Eve tries to lose these goons by driving into a holo, but ends up having to take care of them on foot so that Astra can retreat to safety. But the event itself and some of the things that they said are rather unsettling. So Eve decides to investigate the matter further and asks a former coworker to help her out. And I didn't expect to see a familiar face here, but hello, Rain, former co-worker of Special Agent Eve. Now, Eve had managed to knock a communicator off of one of the guys in the holo, and she asked Rain if she can get any data off of it. But the only thing that Rain can get is the name of an organization, Fugue. And just so we're clear, Fugue isn't some shady criminal organization or anything, it's just an entertainment corporation that's currently feuding with Astra's record company, Odium. Assuming business as usual, Astra's probably not in a whole lot of danger. This attempted kidnapping might have just been Fugue's way of sabotaging Odium's bottom line, because, you know, Astra-Yao is one of their most profitable talents. But this hypothesis would only apply if these Fugue operatives were acting to further the company's interests, which is unlikely because these guys are also after the legacy album of Huron de Winter that Astra found with Phaethon in the holo. Now, why would a corporation like Fugue be interested in a single album? They wouldn't be. So if the executives at Fugue aren't behind Astra's kidnapping, who is? This is what Eve is investigating right up until the night of Astra's big concert at Starloop Tower. But to make things more complicated, while Eve is technically employed by Astra to be her manager and bodyguard, she is also hired to be a corporate spy for Fugue, unbeknownst to everybody else. But despite her employment status, Astra's safety will always be her top, if not her only, priority. Which is great because Starloop Tower has a detachable flying top containing a concert hall where Astra is performing, and someone has sabotaged the control room. You know, the place that helps this flying saucer maintain stability and, like, not crash to the ground in a fiery explosion of death. Fortunately, those concert tickets Astra gave Phaethon come in handy because Phaethon is able to help Eve secure the main controls. But having control of the controls might be a bit useless if the power goes out. And what powers the top of a flying tower? Why, it's Astra's voice, of course. The whole tower relies on these little harmonic cores that generate energy through sound waves produced by Astra's music. So if her concert gets interrupted before the finale, the whole concert hall's gonna be on a collision course with the ground. And to make matters worse, there's also a bomb on board. A bomb set by Euron de Winter's widow, Tessa. Tessa had a very difficult time coping with the circumstances of Euron's death. She blamed everyone but him for his suicide. Odium and Fugue with their contract disputes over his music, the public who criticized him, the audience who moved on to other performers like Astra after his death, they were all to blame, and she wanted to take them all out in one fell swoop. So she takes out the resonance cores powering the Starloop's engines, then summons a combat mech as a show of force, and reveals Eve's double agent identity to Astra at gunpoint before disappearing into the crowd to await death. Astra's trust in Eve isn't shaken one bit by this, and even if it was, there are more pressing matters to attend to. You know, like not dying. Astra tries to reactivate the resonance cores on her own, but her voice isn't enough. Fortunately, though, she's not alone. The audience finds the courage to sing along with her, and their song manages to reactivate the resonance cores long enough for the Starloop to land safely. No casualties. Tessa was quickly taken into custody, but despite her crimes, Astra decides to give her the authentic copy of her husband's legacy album in the hopes that it would help her come to terms with Euron's death. After all, even though she wanted to put an end to everything, including her own life, she did try to steal that album not once, but twice. It definitely means a lot to her. Public security also opened a small investigation into the organization that Eve used to belong to. You know, the same one she worked at with Rain. This organization doesn't actually come up again during season 1, but Zenless loves its foreshadowing. And if it's not relevant in season 1, I suspect it will become relevant in season 2. Just to give you another example of how much Zenless loves its foreshadowing, our first encounter with Hugo and Vivian, the main characters of the epilogue chapter, happens not within the chapter itself, but during the Ridu's Got Boo event that's hosted at Starloop Tower shortly after Astra's concert. And while the Bang Boo pageant does take center stage for most of the event, behind the scenes, Hugo is living up to his Phantom Thief name. He'd sent a warning letter claiming his organization, called Mockingbird, would steal the Yearlight that year. And the Yearlight is a very important symbol of a national holiday that commemorates the day the Void Hunter Joyous first managed to calculate a successful path through the Hollow and return safely. A true turning point in Eridu's history. Now, Lycaon was sent to thwart this plan, but the Yearlight theft was really just a misdirection. Hugo's real target wasn't the Yearlight at all, but instead a copy of Astra Yao's first album, The Stars of Lyra, which he successfully stole from her and replaced with a more valuable limited edition copy, without anybody noticing. And this is our first glimpse into the inner machinations of Hugo's mind, and we're about to get a lot more familiar with it. So Hugo may be a thief, but he's not really one to lurk in the shadows. Instead of doing the sensible thing and trying to keep a low profile after stealing Astra's CD from Astra, he shows up at Random Play looking for a movie called Children of Devils. But this request, like most of the things he does, is just a cover and an excuse for foreshadowing. But more on that later. Hugo officially introduces himself as an art curator and collector who rubs elbows with society's upper crust. He then jokes that some people within high society like collecting human organs of all things, which is not just disturbing, but it's also a very strange thing to say to someone that you've only met twice. But it's also foreshadowing for later, so I'm going to ignore the weirdness. In an effort to perhaps remove said weirdness, Hugo also offers Belle and Wise tickets to a private auction and tells them about a raffle that they might be interested in, which is much less weird. But the raffle is just bait, pure and simple. It's a means for Hugo to ease the Master Proxies into his master plan, and they fall for it, hook, line, and sinker. So they attend the raffle only to run into Hugo again, surprise, surprise, but more importantly, they also have their first encounter with someone of the Ravenlock family there. And you better get familiar with these guys because they're pretty important. Hugo explains that the Ravenlocks were once a rather affluent and influential family affiliated with Topps, but in recent years they'd lost much of that wealth and power that they once enjoyed. A real fall from grace, if you will. I've mentioned the term a few times at this point, but if you're unfamiliar, Topps is basically like a coalition of massive corporations in New Eridu, companies like Odium and Fugue. This coalition of corporations is trying to wrestle power away from the local New Eridu government. And that includes the mayor of New Eridu, and he's pretty important because he's also Victoria Housekeeping's current employer. This is all information that Lycaon tells us when we get back to the video store after the raffle event. And this mayor wants to talk to Belle and Wise. As for why the mayor wants to talk to two random video store owners, it's because he was actually friends with Belle and Wise's teacher, Carol Arna. So he knows who Belle and Wise are. He knows that they are Phaethon. Heck, he probably knows a lot more than just that. But the good news is he's not their enemy. In fact, he's here to help Belle and Wise in Carol's place. Somehow or another, the mayor got his hands on some of Carol's research into the siblings' ocular implants. Now, while he doesn't elaborate on the true purpose of these implants, he does explain that because they're wired directly into Belle and Wise's brains, their functions are limited by their body's condition, which is being dragged down by the strain of using the HDD to sync with Eos, thus lowering their ether aptitude, which makes them susceptible to corruption within the hollows, which is also why they're not supposed to stay in the hollows for that long. Now, Carol was researching ways to mitigate the effects of syncing with the HDD, but she vanished before she could finish her research. So the mayor decided to hire a team of specialists from the Marcel group to continue her research, and they happened to find a way to upgrade the HDD system in such a way that it would reduce the strain it puts on Belle and Wise's bodies, which would then allow Belle and Wise's bodies to regain their original ether aptitude. In other words, they would now be able to go into hollows for longer periods of time without fearing corruption. And now, just a fun fact, the Marcel Group is a company that was established by the Void Hunter Sunbringer. She also invented the Bang Boos, so it's very fitting that the Marcel Group is the one upgrading the HDD since it's responsible for syncing with Eos, who's a Bang Boo. In light of that, you might think the Marcel Group is the one responsible for giving Astra the Sensory Sync prototype. However, we know she got it from Tops, and given that the Marcel Group seems to be affiliated with the mayor, it's unlikely that the Marcel Group is part of Tops, although it is possible. After a quick test of their new ether adaptability, the mayor also explains that the sacrifice monsters are different from ethereals in that they can exist outside of the hollows thanks to a mysterious core that allows them to sustain themselves without the presence of ether. So if one should ever be set loose upon the city, it would cause panic and chaos. Which is, yes, more foreshadowing. Because as it turns out, that sacrifice monster that they found with Bellabog, well, it also had a core inside of it, and that core had been extracted and kept in the mayor's high security office, only for someone to magically steal it and then put it up for auction. And that's no bueno, so the mayor wants Phaethon to retrieve it. But tickets to a high society auction are a little bit hard to get, so the only person they can turn to is Hugo, who does agree to help them, but only if they do him a small favor first. Nothing too difficult, just listening in on a conversation between Hartman Ravenlock and his associate. And boy, are those guys up to no good. Insurance scams and organ trafficking? Yikes. But hey, that's not our problem. It is Hugo's problem. We are just here for the auction invitations and we've done our part, so hand them over. But it's kind of starting to look like the Ravenlock stuff is going to be our problem because we keep running into them. That one Ravenlock that we met at the raffle is present at the auction, and so is Hartman. Now, the auction lounge is where we make first contact with Vivian, or I guess second contact, since we also saw her at the Bang Boo pageant. And Vivian is an associate of Hugo's, although we're not really supposed to know that yet. There's barely time to exchange greetings before a desperate woman named Sienna begs Vivian to purchase a certain necklace for her. And Vivian does so, but has no intention of handing it over to Sienna. This is actually a good thing, but we won't know that until later. Oh, and see this lady? You want to remember her for later too. But for now, Phaethon is a bit more preoccupied with a gem that they believe is the sacrifice core that they're looking for. And they're gonna have to enter a bidding war with Hartman Ravenlock in order to get it. And get it we do not, because Hartman happens to win that bidding war. But he doesn't get to bask in the glow of victory for very long, because the lights go out, and when they return, Hugo, dressed as Mockingbird, flaunts his stolen sacrifice core before disappearing into the night, like he was never there. Now, if you played through Lycaon's companion mission, you would know that Lycaon and Hugo have a bit of a history together, so Lycaon wastes no time giving chase into a nearby hollow. But catching up to Hugo is a little too easy. It's like we're being lured into a trap. But the usually calm and collected Lycaon is a little too emotional about the whole thing to pay it much attention. This ends with a confrontation that puts Hugo and Lycaon's philosophical disagreements on full display, and fortunately, Phaethon doesn't die in the struggle. As for what led to this difference in philosophies, well, that requires a deeper look into their shared history. You see, Hugo was the illegitimate child of the Ravenlock family, hence why he's been watching them from a distance. And if you asked him what his childhood was like, he'd probably describe it as hell on earth. His own father tortured his children, caused countless others to suffer, and his children followed in the footsteps of their father's cruelty. Like, when they noticed how well Hugo got along with his half-sister Serena, the other children murdered her and pinned the blame on Hugo. But instead of punishing him for this murder of his own child, Hugo's father rewarded him instead, and life never got better. After surviving countless assassination attempts, suffering unspeakable cruelties, he finally reached his limit and ran away from home. It wasn't long before he met Lycaon and his mentor Jack. Now, Jack was a bit of a phantom thief, and although he was not particularly well off, he did take both of them in, and he taught them everything he knew, including his philosophy of justice. Now, Jack believed that no matter what, a life should never be taken. Murder should never be an option because no one should ever be in a position where they can unilaterally determine what form justice should take. This was a philosophy that Lycaon shared with Jack. But Hugo saw things a little bit differently. Although he did swear an oath not to kill anyone alongside Lycaon and Jack, he still believed in the concept of fairness. If you killed someone, you deserved to be killed. It's only fair. And if killing one person could prevent the deaths of several others, then that should also be considered a good option and the true form of justice, of fairness. This perspective of Hugo's worried both Lycaon and Jack. Jack was afraid that these ideals may lead Hugo down the wrong path at some point in the future. And should that ever happen, Jack hoped Lycaon would be able to stop him before it was too late. Hugo was aware of this conversation and of Jack and Lycaon's lack of trust in him, but he never confronted them about it because he still believed that he was right. Even after Jack passed away and he and Lycaon founded Mockingbird together, he still believed in the concept of fairness, an eye for an eye, equivalent exchange, if you will. So Hugo spent years plotting revenge against his father, truly believing that if his father were to die, countless other lives could be saved. So he arranged for there to be a Mockingbird mission at the Ravenlock family manor, and while the others were busy being a distraction, he would slip away unnoticed to kill his father. And he nearly succeeded, but as he was about to deal that final blow, he remembered the oath he swore to never take a life, and he hesitated. And because he hesitated for too long, his father regained consciousness. Hugo panicked and vanished, but his father had an idea of what happened, and he was furious. He locked everyone in the hall of the manor while he sought out his assassin, but when he couldn't find them, he killed everyone in the hall and blamed it on a nearby hollow disaster. When Hugo came out of hiding and found the bodies, he realized that his mistake in not killing his father resulted in all of these deaths. Lycaon arrived just in time to witness the aftermath of the slaughter, and he immediately assumed that Hugo was the guilty party. He truly believed that Hugo broke his promise not to take a life. And despite not having been involved with their murders directly, he still felt responsible for their deaths. And even though it hurt that Lycaon didn't trust him despite everything that they've been through together, Hugo couldn't bring himself to correct him. And to add insult to injury, Lycaon left Mockingbird soon after and went to work for the mayor. He effectively abandoned Hugo, and this was the ultimate betrayal in Hugo's eyes. So Lycaon doesn't trust Hugo because he thinks Hugo murdered his family. Hugo feels like Lycaon betrayed their friendship by leaving and not trusting him. And even if they could reconcile their differences, Hugo still wants revenge on what's left of his family, especially Hartman. And that is why Hugo stole the sacrifice core from the mayor's office. As for what he intends to do with that core, well, he sent a letter of intent to the mayor threatening to use the core to unleash sacrifice monsters upon the city. Seems a little extreme for a family feud to me, but okay. So I guess if we want to figure out what's going on with the sacrifices and how they relate to Hugo's plan, we're gonna need to investigate the Exaltist Order because they're the ones who are responsible for the sacrifices in the first place. And the best place to start is by investigating Bringer, because, you know, he was not just a part of the Exaltists, but he also became a sacrifice in the end. So we start by checking in with Zhu Yuan, who mentions some oddities around Bringer's case and even suspects that some recent missing person and organ trafficking cases could be related to that case, which is strange. Hugo also mentions something about the upper crust collecting organs, and the Ravenlocks he's targeting are also involved with organ trafficking, and also some insurance scam where people are going missing. So it appears that the Ravenlocks are in bed with the Exaltists. So I guess it makes sense that Hugo would target the Exaltist stuff if he wants revenge on the Ravenlocks, because if you draw out one, you'll get to the other, right? So we're definitely on the right track. Another officer mentions that Bringer always carried around a notebook, but that notebook was not present with the rest of his retrieved belongings. A Bangbu also mentions a missing tape recorder that Bringer used to use, and yet another officer comments on how Bringer once had a complete change of personality after some event in a hollow, and he's had memory issues ever since. I guess memory issues would explain both the notebook and the tape recorder when you sit down and think about it. Now, Section 6 actually has the tape recorder, and one of those recordings has an encrypted track on it. This track actually documents Bringer's near-death experience within the hollow, the one that resulted in his full change in personality. He had been fatally wounded fighting off the ethereals and fully expected to die within the hollow, but as he was recording his last wishes on that tape recorder, he suddenly caught sight of some thing. He calls this thing the Creator, and it spoke to him, told him that humanity must learn to embrace the hollows before healing Bringer's wounds and saving his life. This was the moment that Bringer changed, and also the reason why he joined the Exaltists. That's all well and good, but we're still missing Bringer's notebook. And that's when Vivian steps up to help. She has a history with the Exaltists and wants to put a stop to whatever it is that they're doing, and she also has information on where Bringer's notebook can be found. It's apparently somewhere in Blazewood, so it's off to the outer ring where we run into both Trigger and Anby, who's wearing a very fancy new outfit. Well, I guess it's technically an old outfit since it's the one that she wore before she joined the Cunning Hares. See, Anby used to be the captain of Silver Squad, a special experimental team within the Defense Force that was made entirely out of cloned super soldiers. Soldier 11 is another such clone, and the only surviving clone besides Anby. The rest of them had been disposed of when the project ended, although one of the disposed clones managed to survive and was retrieved by a rogue doctor that happens to be working for the Ravenlock family. So you know that whole thing about how the Ravenlocks are doing organ trafficking? Yeah, this is where they're getting the organs. Twiggy has been making clones of the Silver Soldiers so that she can harvest those organs and sell them to the Ravenlocks in exchange for them funding her research. It's pretty messed up. Anyway, that is why Anby's here. She's already dealt with Twiggy, but she's still investigating her ties to the Ravenlocks, and also to this strange serum that Twiggy used to turn herself into a rather unique ethereal. So Anby's actually here in Blazewood to meet a contact in order to get more intel on the situation, and this contact just so happens to be Sienna, the woman who asked Vivian to bid for the necklace at the auction. And strangely, when Vivian sees her again, she starts to cry. Her tears go mostly ignored as Sienna exchanges the intel Anby needs for escort services into the hollow so she can look for something that she's lost. It just so happens this is the same hollow that Vivian and Phaethon need to go into, so they decide to tag along and look for Bringer's notebook along the way. More power in numbers, right? But after spending a short time looking for Sienna's missing wedding ring, Vivian is the only one not surprised to find Sienna dead when they return to the rally point. Vivian explains that Sienna was terminally ill and couldn't afford treatment, so she had faked her results on an ether aptitude test so she could take out a hollow corruption insurance policy through Ravenlock Insurance. That way, if she died of ether corruption, her daughter would receive a large payout. This was the only means by which Sienna could extract the reparations owed to her by the Ravenlocks over her husband's death. You know, since the Ravenlocks effectively murdered him and all. And Vivian knew everything. See, from the moment Vivian was born, she's had prophetic visions of disasters that drove her to tears. She'd always considered this ability a curse because no matter how hard she tries, she can never prevent the misfortune that she sees from coming true. And when she met Sienna in Blazewood, she foresaw the circumstances of her death. Trigger and Anby take Sienna's body out of the hollow, leaving Vivian and Phaethon to retrieve Bringer's notebook on their own and meet up with Hugo. Because surprise, surprise, Hugo and Vivian are both from Mockingbird. We're allowed to know that now. And the two of them would love to form a working partnership with Phaethon, seeing as both parties want to put a stop to the Exaltists and to their Ravenlock partners. Admittedly, it's a little difficult to trust a criminal organization, so Lycaon will be accompanying them as a precaution, as will Anby. She still wants to end the Ravenlock's involvement in the Silver Soldier project, after all. Perhaps as an additional show of good faith, Vivian also gives the pendant that she won at the auction to Phaethon, although this is at Hugo's instructions, which does make this move a bit suspicious. But we can deal with that later. They follow the coordinates found in Bringer's notebook, and it leads them to the ballet twins, so there must be something of interest there. Now, as a side note, I do wonder if the mayor knew that there was something suspicious about the ballet twins, and that was why he bought the towers in the first place. But that's actually impossible to confirm for right now. It's just suspicions on my part. But it's during this investigation that Vivian realizes that the proxies that they've been traveling with and hanging out with are actually the legendary Phaethon. And that's a huge deal because Vivian is Phaethon's #1 fan. Not necessarily because she admires their work as proxies, but because, well, Vivian's powers of prophecy had never brought her anything but pain. And over time, she began to believe that she was actually the cause of these disasters. So maybe if she were to disappear, then the disasters and misfortune would disappear along with her. So one night, when she contemplated ending it all, someone left a message on a post that she wrote. And that message was the one thing that convinced her to live. And that message came from Phaethon. That single message changed her life and allowed her to find a way to like herself. And she felt so grateful and indebted to Phaethon that she made it her mission to find them and thank them. And now here they are, standing right in front of her. Vivian can't think of what else to call it except fate. But I call it Hugo scheming because he definitely knew Phaethon's identity all along and how important they were to Vivian. And if nothing else, he cares a lot about Vivian because Vivian reminds him of his little sister, Serena. You know, the one the Ravenlocks murdered. So when Hugo has a moment alone with them, he asks Phaethon to keep her safe. He has something he needs to do, and he doesn't want her to get her hands dirty. And then he spills everything about his history with Lycaon and his motivations for what's still to come, and it's really just the confession of a man prepared to die in the pursuit of his beliefs. But while this uncomfortable chat is still ongoing, Vivian, Lycaon, and Anby are arriving at the marked coordinates where they find a cocoon containing a dormant sacrifice. And it's not the only one. There are many coordinates marked on Bringer's notebook, well over a dozen of them, which means that there must be at least as many sacrifice monsters scattered throughout the city. And that's a huge problem because unlike ethereal, sacrifices can exist outside of the hollow, so if the Exaltists want to wake them up, it would mean chaos and a lot of unnecessary deaths. And that's when Hartman shows up and reveals that he's teamed up with Hugo of all people, and that probably seems pretty weird given how much Hugo hates Hartman and the Ravenlocks. Ah, you see, but this too is part of Hugo's master plan. He needed to lure Hartman into a false sense of security, and the best way to do that was to make a deal with him, all without Hartman knowing Hugo's identity as a Ravenlock. Which makes the theatrical betrayal of Hartman and the big Hugo is a Ravenlock reveal all the more satisfying. But it doesn't make Hugo an ally. He still wants the sacrifice core for his own purposes, going so far as to take Phaethon hostage so Vivian has to hand it over. But Lycaon is having none of it. He springs into action, and before Hugo can react, his claws are through Hugo's chest. And he doesn't bat an eye as Hugo falls to his death. Hartman escapes with the sacrifice core in the confusion, and when Vivian finally overcomes her shock and composes herself, she turns to look at Phaethon and has a sudden vision of their unavoidable death. And hey, remember this lady from the auction? Well, turns out she's an Exaltus that's been following us this whole time. Yeah, we're in a whole lot of trouble, aren't we? Mockingbird's death makes for very big headlines, in part because the articles identify Mockingbird as a Ravenlock, leading many to suspect that Hartman murdered this guy in order to secure his own position within the family. These rumors, that the mayor started by the way, have forced Hartman into hiding, and now that she's over her initial shock, Vivian isn't too convinced that Hugo is really dead, and she intends to continue with the original plan, even if that means working alongside Lycaon and the mayor. Which is good, because the mayor has some juicy intel. Now, apparently, the sacrifices scattered around the city were created many years ago by an exaltist scientist named Landon. Landon had developed a type of serum that could be injected into the human body and transform them into a kind of sacrifice. This serum should sound familiar because I'm pretty sure it's the same serum that Twiggy had, and it's most likely a more rudimentary version of the serum that Bringer used. And that means that Hartman's exaltist cohorts are most likely from the same sect that used to follow Landon. And to make matters worse, it seems like Hartman and the exaltists were trying to further the development of the serum in order to create new types of sacrifices. Now, you may recall that the Ravenlocks have experienced a fall from grace, if you will. They've lost a lot of the wealth, power, and influence that they used to have. So they kind of rely on sponsorship from Tops. Now, Tops' interest in this project has more to do with gaining power over the city than it does furthering the idea of people living within the Hollows, which is what the whole sacrifice project is about. Because if the sacrifices are released into the city outside of the Hollows, it would eliminate the public's trust in the city's government, allowing Tops to take over. So one option we could pursue is getting rid of the sponsorship that Tops is providing to the Ravenlocks. Not quite sure how to do that just yet, so perhaps the more prudent course of action is to find and retrieve the sacrifices so that they can be safely disposed of. In return for Phaethon's assistance in this mission, the mayor has arranged for a very powerful Hollow investigator to mentor Phaethon and help them unlock some of their more unique skills, since her area of research overlaps with Carol's. Now, just to clarify something, this investigator is not a Void Hunter. She's described as being of a Void Hunter rank because she's powerful enough to be a Void Hunter if she decided to take on the job. But it's very important to note that the title of Void Hunter these days is a job title. So if you took it up, you would work for the government. And something tells me that this investigator, Yi Xuan, isn't really interested in working for the government. At least not full-time. Now, the mayor isn't able to offer Vivian much in return for her assistance, but that's probably okay. Vivian has a long history and a score to settle with the Exaltists, and it just so happens that she also knew Landon. Apparently, he took her in when she was very young and promised her a world where the people didn't have to fear the Hollows. He even promised her that whoever became the victim of her calamity prophecies would receive a special blessing from him that would prevent that future from coming to pass. But of course, that wasn't actually what he was doing. He was really just exploiting the power of Vivian's prophetic abilities to select willing test subjects for his sacrifice experiments. Vivian was far too young to realize what Landon was up to until one day, she had a vision about his daughter, Dina, and Dina's reaction wasn't a positive one. And that confused Vivian because receiving a blessing from her father should have been a good thing, right? So in order to understand why Dina reacted the way she did, Vivian secretly followed Landon one night so she could witness a blessing firsthand. But what she witnessed was Landon injecting a man with a sacrifice serum, corrupting him, and then killing him. Vivian was terrified that the same thing would happen to Dina if she told anyone that she had the vision, so she lied and said that Landon should be the next one to be blessed. Landon was so furious he pulled out a gun and tried to shoot her, but Dina's caretaker, Camille, tried to wrestle it from his grasp, only for it to go off prematurely and kill him. Dina never forgave Vivian for her father's death, so Vivian ran away and got picked up by Hugo and the other Mockingbirds. And that's why Vivian asked Hugo to help her investigate the sacrifices in the first place. And of course he agreed to help her. It's not like he can deny his adopted sister anything that she wants. Especially not now that his own family is involved. But Hugo's not here right now, and, well, neither are the sacrifices. See, someone either moved or destroyed the sacrifices at the coordinates marked by Bringer's notebook. And it turns out that this someone is actually someone Vivian knows quite well. It's that white-haired Exaltist lady that's been following us around. That's Camille, the caretaker of Landon's daughter Dina. And Vivian can only shed tears when they meet because she sees a vision of Camille's future, or rather, a lack thereof. And as if things aren't complicated enough, whatever it is that this group of Exaltus is up to, it's connected to the Raven Lock's ether mining insurance fraud scam thing. So Vivian takes Phaethon to visit a contact of hers to get more intel. And it's Rain. Again. Seriously, why is this girl involved in literally everything going on in New Eridu? We should just add a room in the video store for her at this point. Seriously. Anyway, Rain thinks that the ether mining story is actually a cover and that the Ravenlocks have been smuggling workers into the Hollow, and the workers do not come out of the Hollows. Now, her theory is backed up by a victim of the Ravenlocks. He claims that the Ravenlocks offered him a huge sum of money to do some work inside the Hollow. So he and a bunch of other workers took the offer and went to do their work inside the Hollow. But once they were inside, Hartman's men forced all of the workers to ingest pills that messed with their minds and forced them to obey orders while they were hallucinating. And while they were under the influence of these drugs, this man unknowingly killed the rest of the workers. And that was exactly what the Ravenlocks were looking for. This guy happened to be the perfect candidate to become a new type of sacrifice. A sacrifice that would obey commands. But fortunately, Hugo had been tailing these guys and managed to help him escape before they were able to inject him with the sacrifice serum. Rena takes the man into protective custody and learns where Hartman is hiding the sacrifice core, and she also learns that he plans to hand that core over to the Exaltists, and soon. So we have got to get our hands on that core, and fast. But there's just one problem. The core Hartman has is fake. Hartman is shocked by the whole thing, but Dina isn't. She seems to think that Vivian knows where the real one is, and when Dina realizes that Vivian doesn't know, she summons a horde of ethereals and then leaves. But there are way too many ethereals for Vivian to handle on her own, so you know that mentor that the mayor promised Phaethon? The super strong one? Yeah, that's Yixuan. She's been tailing Phaethon for a while now and decides that it's time to finally step in. She makes quick work of the ethereal horde and promises to visit again at a later date. She came and went so fast I got whiplash. So okay, the sacrifice core that Hugo left behind was a fake, and they have no idea where the real one might be. So Vivian starts to think that maybe Hugo left behind some kind of clue for her. So she retraces her steps back to the auction house and talks to Shawl, who tells her that a blonde man in a hat, most likely Hugo, had apparently stolen some kind of recording on the night of the auction. Vivian quickly locates the tape thanks to some messenger birds that Mockingbird uses, and is shocked to discover that it contains a recording of a conversation between Hugo and Camille. Apparently, Camille told him that Dina was trying to carry on Landon's research and create sacrifices that can only obey human commands. So those pills that the Ravenlocks are testing on these unsuspecting workers are the mind control pills. They're part of this whole scheme. Which means if we want more information, we've got to infiltrate the Ravenlocks, and it just so happens that they're hosting a banquet tonight at the Ravenlock Manor, which means we should also be able to sneak into Hartman's office. There should be something interesting in there, right? But let's just say that stealth isn't exactly Vivian and Phaethon's strong point. They get caught almost immediately by Hartman, who pulls a gun on them and tries to shoot, except there are no bullets in his gun, because Hugo stole them all. In fact, Hugo planned this entire arrangement. He even faked his own death in order to shift Hartman's attention away from him so he could do more stuff behind the scenes. And the best part about this is that Lycaon was in on it. He actually picked up on the hints Hugo dropped during his dramatic monologue up there on the building when he took Phaethon hostage, and Lycaon went along with his ex-partner's performance, which was so extravagant and well-planned that Hugo had even had a fake blood bag in his jacket. And you know something? Despite everything, their past misunderstandings, their difference in philosophies, Hugo still trusted Lycaon to understand what he was doing. And deep down, I think Lycaon wanted to trust Hugo as well. Which is hard as heck, I know. The guy is like a quadruple agent at this point, betraying everyone at least once, or at least pretending to. I mean, he infiltrated Tops, he partnered and betrayed both the Ravenlocks and Phaethon, and heck, Hugo even helped the mayor by sending him letters of criminal intent which allowed the mayor to take some actions in the locations related to the sacrifices without rousing suspicion. But there's a price to pay for all this meddling. See, when Hugo made his original deal with Hartman, you know, the one that allowed him to lure Hartman into the Hollow so he could fake his own death, Hartman wasn't a total sucker. He still suspected that Hugo might be a bit too unreliable, so he was slipping him some of those mind control pills during every meeting. Of course, they were low doses over multiple meetings, but the side effects are still nothing to scoff at. But Hugo's not stupid. He knew this was happening. He just let it happen. Like, on the one hand, he didn't want to arouse Hartman's suspicions, but on the other hand, he really needed to understand the drug's effects. That way, he could collect data on the drug in order to help develop an antidote, or at least hire someone who could help him develop an antidote. That would help mitigate any damage that the mind control pills would have if they ever got out into the public market. Now, a true antidote is still a ways off, but in the meantime, Hugo has managed to delay the side effects on himself with the help of a very talented chemist. But it won't work forever. Hugo does have to let the drug work its way out of his system eventually, so he decides to have Lycaon tie him to a chair in a warehouse during the detox. If he's lucky, he'll survive this ordeal with his mind still intact. And honestly, it's a good thing he was tied and locked up because those hallucinations are no joke. It is very easy to see how that one worker from earlier was goaded into killing the other workers with this drug. It preys on every fear and insecurity you could possibly have. But Hugo survives, and also manages to reconcile with Lycaon. To an extent. I'm sure these two still have a lot to talk about. But that's gonna have to wait for later because there's still a lot that needs to be done before Hugo can confront Hartman. He still needs some kind of solid evidence of the Ravenlocks committing a crime so that he can leak it to the press and absolutely demolish their reputation. And of course, he's got a plan for that. He's already hired someone to pretend to be an ether mind worker that the Ravenlocks intend to drug with the mind control pills. And he's also swapped out the real drug for vitamin tablets. This allows him to get the footage he needs to incriminate the Ravenlocks without anyone actually getting hurt. And when the press gets their hands on it, the scandal is so huge that Topps immediately renounces any ties to the Ravenlocks. Now that's what I call nonviolent justice. Now that's one problem down, but we still haven't finished dealing with the current sacrifice crisis. And it's getting more crisis-ier. Because apparently, Dina intends to embed the sacrifice core into the sacrifice in order to make it much, much stronger. Now, this is typically a big no-no among the Exaltists because these supercharged sacrifices attack everything in sight, including their creator, which makes them very dangerous and obviously not great to have around. But Dina is convinced that her mind control pills should be able to counteract this fatal flaw. The sacrifice should be able to obey her commands. Fortunately, the core that she has is fake. As for the location of the real one, well, Hugo big-brained this one too. He put both the real and the fake core up for auction. It's just that the fake one was easier to spot. The real one was hidden inside that trinket that Vivian bought on behalf of Sienna at the auction house. It'll be Lycaon's responsibility to return the core to the mayor, as per Hugo's agreement with him, because they've been working together all along. We've kind of gone over that a couple of times now. So that's one problem solved, but we still need to stop Dina from making any more sacrifices in the first place. And that includes making sure all of the vials of Landon's serum are destroyed, like completely. Locating and destroying the serum is a rather routine task, but Vivian has been haunted by a vision that she had of Phaethon's death, and she is determined to prevent it. So she steals a single vial of the sacrifice serum for herself. And with the rest of the serum destroyed, it is finally time to confront Dina, who is as radicalized as ever and beyond anyone's ability to reason with her. That doesn't stop Camille from trying, though. She decides to sacrifice herself and become the scapegoat for Dina, the Ravenlocks, and everybody else. And then she throws herself at the Ethereals and doesn't bother fighting back. Dina is distressed and furious, and in her rage, she decides to inject herself with what remaining sacrifice serum she has. Also, she can get revenge on Vivian, because Dina would rather blame everyone around her for her own misfortunes instead of blaming herself. Now, I know this is supposed to be a very serious moment and all that, but can someone please explain to me how Dina turned into this kind of ethereal? Like, don't ethereals usually keep some aspects of their original human body? It kind of looked like there was gonna be a Dina-ish part to this ethereal, and then there wasn't, and I don't know what happened. This really bugged me, so I went and checked all the prior sacrifice transformations that we've seen so far, and there is one thing that they have in common that could explain her odd shape. Thus far, every sacrifice has kinda sucked in whatever form forms of sentient life or etheric matter or organic matter that it could reach and then fused with it. Twiggy fused with the other Silver Soldier clones, the OG Sacrifice fused with the smart machinery, and Bringer does seem like he fused with stuff around him too, but since the serum he used is the more perfected version, it seems like his own data kind of like overwrote all of the stuff that he absorbed, which gave him more control over it and allowed him to maintain more of his own shape. So I'm guessing what happened with Dina is that she absorbed all of these other ethereals and stuff like that, and their data or information or shapes kind of overwrote hers, and that's why her outer body doesn't look at all like her while it still somehow retains her voice, at least according to the enemy description. This is just a hypothesis and not meant to be a foolproof explanation or anything, because in the end, the shape she takes seems like it might be pretty inconsequential. What's actually important is that Vivian was able to take down Sacrifice Dina, but it came at a great cost. Because Vivian's power alone was not enough to fight Dina off. And even if she did have the power to fight off Dina, she knew that she wouldn't also be able to protect Phaethon at the same time, because this was how she foresaw Phaethon dying. And that was a future that she just couldn't accept. So she injected herself with the sacrifice serum that she stole and released an enormously powerful blast that knocked Phaethon out and forced Dina into submission and began slowly corrupting Vivian's body. Vivian wandered off to find a quiet place to lose herself where no one would find her. But Phaethon manages to reach her just in time and catches her before she falls, and then the corruption spreads a bit too far for anyone to be able to force it back. Well, through normal means, anyway. But Phaethon is not a normal person. They're not going to be limited to normal means of regressing corruption. They have a super secret power. You remember that whole thing that Carol was researching regarding Phaethon's ocular implants? Yeah, so turns out Carol was looking into a way for people to be able to control ether particles at will. And that's exactly what Phaethon can do. The activation of their implants forces the ether out of Vivian's body and completely reverses the corruption. And then they pass out. So after Phaethon wakes up back at Random Play, Yishwen appears and explains that this particular ability that Phaethon has to control etheric particles is actually one that is quite similar to her own area of research. Or rather, it's quite similar to the mystic arts practiced at her school, and she is quite interested in taking Phaethon in as a disciple. In fact, I'm actually pretty confident that this etheric particle control ability is how they stopped Bringer's attack during the season finale. And I also suspect that it is connected to Astra's ability to use music to manipulate ether. I have a whole theory I want to write about this, so stay tuned for that. And as expected, there are still quite a few unresolved plot points in Season 1, especially when it comes to the Exaltists and the sacrifices, but I suppose we're just gonna have to be content for now and patiently wait for the release of Season 2. So I hope you all enjoyed today's recap. I certainly appreciate you watching all the way to the end, so thank you for being here today. And here's to you all joining me next time. Ta-ta for now.